This week's episode dedicated for dailygiving.org, great organization that gives out money on your behalf every single day, $1 a day. Who doesn't want that? $1 a day on your behalf. Now, $1 doesn't seem like much because it really isn't that much in today's day and age. But when you collect with everybody else, it's a lot. And the power of the group can make a difference. They're giving out tens of thousands of dollars a month to some really great organizations. Check them out, dailygiving.org, dailygiving.org. This week's Torah portion couldn't come at a better time, really. We're going through some serious times out there. This is uncertainty. This is like uncertainty on uncertainty on uncertainty. Like, remember the good old days? And God gives us the portion of the week to help us through it. I want to tell you about just how powerful this portion is, because in this week's Torah portion, we have one of the greatest tests that a human ever went through, which is the binding of Isaac. Abraham comes to the world. Abraham is God's number one spokesman, the person who brings monotheism to the world. Bets on God. God promises him offspring, promises him this is not just going to end with him, gives him Isaac in the oldest part of his life, and then comes to him during this week's Torah portion and says, I want him. I want you to sacrifice him. Biggest test. You remember the story, he brings him up to the mountaintop, and as he's about to, God says, no. And it all wins. Now, most of us misunderstand this because we think the test was killing his son. That was tough. It wasn't the test. You know how you know it wasn't the test? Because during the time there was an idol worship called the Molech, where they sacrificed their children. God wouldn't test Abraham in a way that everybody was doing on the block. Even if Abraham loved his kids more, the test wouldn't be something that the guy next door would be like, yeah, that's a test. I mean, I already got rid of my kids. It had to have been something deeper. What was the real test? So you have to understand something. Abraham was a prophet. And God came to him in prophecy and said, you're going to have offspring, you're going to have descendants. And Abraham trusted God. Trust is at the core of any relationship, especially relationship with God. If I do a business deal with you, and I buy a building from you, and I give you the money for the building, and after I give you the money, you say, oh, by the way, yeah, I'm not giving it to you. It's not just that I lose the building, I lose the relationship. We ain't doing business ever again together. God says, I'll give you offspring. Abraham gives him his entire life. Every day, doing something for God. Every day living his whole life for him. Now he gives him the kid, and at the end of his life, he says, I want it back. The test was Abraham should have said, what? No, that wasn't the deal. You told me, no, I can't. It's too much. You promised me. You told me you'd give me offspring. The test of this week's Torah portion is a test in which we look out into the world and go, God, why would you do that? God, that makes no sense. God, it's contradictory to what I think you want. And when you think about a relationship with the creator of the world, we have to remember that in this relationship, it's not equal. God sees things we don't. There are ways to benefit the world in a way that we can't understand. Our timeline is so limited. His is so expanded. Our vision is so limited. His is so expanded. When we see uncertainty and we assume that it makes no sense because God, why would God want it? God goes, no, you don't get it. You don't see what I see. The test of the binding of Isaac was whether or not Abraham would say, it doesn't make sense to me, so it doesn't make sense. And when God says, I want your son, Abraham says, I don't know why. But if it's right, I'll do it. If you asked for it, I'll do it. We're living in incredible times. And one of the reasons why the hardest part during this time is not getting through it, it's understanding it. We spend so much of our time trying to figure out God. Why would he do this? Why wouldn't he want this? And why wouldn't he wants this to happen? He wants this to happen. We forget that our role in this is to try to do good, is to try to do things we think are right. It's to do our effort. But at the end of the day, our role is to go through life and look up and go, I trust you. Sometimes I trust you in the face of uncertainty to God brings more blessing to our lives than the thing that we wanted originally. Sometimes as we go down a road and go, this is going to be great for me, and God throws us a screen and we go, whoa, why would he do this? But I trust you. That moment of I trust you gets us something later on. A year, 2 years, 10 years. Many times the way God gives us things is he packages it in challenge and says, I'm going to see if you really trust me or you're using me to what you think you want. And sometimes the greatest chance we have to connect to the Creator takes place when we're in uncertainty. Because when we're in periods of uncertainty, you can turn to God and go, I don't know where we're going, but I trust you. And that I trust you could be the sweetest thing in the relationship. Here's the backstory. There's a great rabbi named Shem Shmuel. And he writes this amazing piece that the reason why Sarah laughed when she found out that she was giving birth, why would she laugh for? She laughed because she knew that the soul of Isaac was coming from the feminine world. That's why the verse says he will give Sarah the child. What that means that Isaac came down to the world, but he had a feminine soul, which means he couldn't bear children as the male. This is deep Kabbalistic stuff. It's not the way we understand it. So she laughed because she knew the purpose of having Isaac wasn't just to have a kid, it was to continue the offspring. And she knew that if that soul comes from that place, even though he's alive, he couldn't have children. When Isaac was up at that sacrifice, the Shem Shmuel says that Abraham had nicked him. And when he nicked him, his soul went up to heaven. And when his soul went up to heaven, because Abraham did that hard thing, he was worthy of the miracle that a new soul came to Isaac, if we can understand this. The sacrifice of Isaac wasn't preventing him having offspring. The sacrificing of Isaac was actually the reason why he was able to have offspring. Because had Abraham not brought him up on that altar, he wouldn't have been able to be worthy of the transfer of souls. It's deep stuff. I don't get it, but I'm telling you what I'm learning. In fact, at that moment, that soul came down, as far as I heard, is the soul of Rebekah. The binding of Isaac was how God gave them offspring. It wasn't the detour, it was the path. Abraham couldn't see it because he wasn't supposed to see it. That's our life. Sometimes the greatest blessing that's waiting for us comes from the back end of uncertainty. We're living in uncertain times. And many times we look out in these times and go, God, when are you going to do the things that I think you're going to do? We're just looking at it wrong. We got to do the best we can. When we deal with uncertainty, the way to deal with uncertainty is to say to ourselves, what do I got to do right now? The future, God, I trust you. How it plays out, God, I trust you. What will be, God, I trust you. What I got to do now, that's my business. That's what you want of me. Every one of us has that gene of Abraham. To fight, even if it's uncertain. To push, even if we're unsure. And to trust, even if the world around us seems to be contradictory. Because that's what it means to be a Jew. And that's what it means to be the son of the great Abraham.